Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us at the reInvent Work Summit virtually. We have 100 different culture leaders in the room from all different walks of life, different sectors of business, and we're bringing 4 different perspectives on reinventing work to you through the technology of Google Hangout. So I'm just going to go through and introduce each of you briefly, and when I introduce you, I'm going to ask you to share a bit of the story about your perspective of work reinvention. And Joe, are you going to go first? Jody, can you hear me?
Yeah, are you talking to Jody?
Yes, Jody.
I can hear you. I can hear about every third word that you're saying. So I will try to track with you. But yes, here I am.
Okay. Jody is one of the co-creators of the results-only work environment. Can you hear me, Derek?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Jody's one of the co-creators of the results-only work environment, ROWE, and actually 2 years ago, Jody was our keynote speaker at our Impact 99 event and introduced everyone to the results-only work environment. So, Jody, can you just give a little bit of the background of what ROWE is, of what ROWE is?
Okay, so Pam, I think you want me to give a little background on what a results-only work environment is. If that is true, give me a thumbs up. Okay, woohoo! All right, hi everyone out there. It's good to be back. I will just give a very brief overview of what a results-only work environment is. And all of you guys out there that have seen this before, a results-only work environment goes a little bit further than flexibility. And I know everybody's working really hard to try to implement flexible work into their work environment, so that's really great. But a results-only work environment goes a little bit further, as Pam knows. We've talked about this a lot. It's an environment where there's 100% accountability and 100% autonomy. So autonomy is more than flexibility. Autonomy is where people have, they're self-governing and independent. So that means you're not asking permission of your boss to leave early or come in later or have a longer lunch or work from home on Friday. You don't have to ask permission anymore. You just do it like an adult, right? So in this environment, that means everybody has to be crystal clear about what the work is and what you're responsible for. And what's interesting about this work environment is managers have to manage the work, not the people. They can't be looking over you and wondering where you are. You have to be managing yourself, right? You're not asking permission. You're not telling people where you are. It's very liberating. And in this work environment, we're seeing, increases in engagement. It's a talent magnet for the next generation. And it's really a place where people feel, like Dan Pink said, it's that place where people are achieving that autonomy, mastery, and purpose in their jobs. So that's, in a nutshell, what a results-only work environment is. 100% accountability, 100% autonomy. It is the new employee agreement.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jody. So results-only work environment. Now, Doug, I'm going to go to you next. And Doug and I I heard Doug speak a couple of years ago at the Work Revolution Summit, and I was so blown away. I shared with you this morning, I mentioned Morningstar, but I didn't tell you anything about Morningstar. And I'd like Doug to share with you the story briefly about Morningstar and self-management. By the way, sorry, Jody is the co-author of 2 books, Why Work Sucks and How to Fix It, and Why Management Sucks and How to Fix It. Doug is the author of Beyond Empowerment. I actually have copies of them back in the room, and I will show the audience them as soon as we are finished here, and I can go back in there. So Doug, can you tell us a bit about Morningstar and self-management?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, and thanks to your IT team and everyone that got things going. So when I got out of college a few years ago, I met a young entrepreneur named Chris River, and he had some ideas for a new state-of-the-art food processing facility, a tomato processing facility. And so I joined his team, and I was a financial controller. And we started a little company. It was very technologically advanced and very successful. But we didn't put a lot of thought into organizational design. So we ended up with a typical default hierarchical command and control pyramid. Chris was the top of the pyramid, managing partner, and then there were layer of managers, myself, production manager, marketing manager, etc. And then we had a layer of supervisors who were technicians that kind of organized factory operations. And we had a layer of coordinators, carried out the wishes of technicians. And we had everybody else that did all the real work. And fine as far as it went, but very frustrating. And part of our frustration stemmed from the fact that anytime there was a dispute, a problem, an issue, a conflict, anywhere in the pyramid, it always went right straight to the top because we had an open door policy. And so we got absolutely zero value out of our organizational structure. In fact, got negative value out of it because it bred politics and infighting and all kinds of negative effects. So fast forward to 1990, Chris left to start a new company called Morningstar. He's a very continuous improvement-minded individual. Had some new ideas for technology. I joined the new company as a financial controller, and we were working out of a little tiny farmhouse in Northern California. This was the spring of 1990, and one day Chris came in and met with the team. There were about 24 of us at the time, and said, I'd like to get together and have a meeting with everyone and talk about how to organize the enterprise. And so we said, sure. So we all got together in the evening in a dusty little construction trailer out in the job site, sat around in a circle, and he passed around a document called the Morningstar Colleague Principles. And basically they boiled down to two principles. One was people should not use force or coercion against other people. And secondly, that people should honor the commitments that they make to each other. Pretty simple and yet rather profound. They provide pretty much the entire foundation for all law everywhere in the world. They pretty much provide the foundation for civilization. They are to human interaction what gravity is to physics. And so we really couldn't argue with them. They made sense. We discussed them for a couple hours and we adopted them. And to the best of my knowledge, that moment was the birth of pure organizational self-management, at least at the level of a large manufacturing enterprise. And so away we went. We had a factory to build. We had about 3.5 months to build it. We had vital equipment coming over from Italy on ocean cargo freighters. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site welding and fabricating, constructing and building. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factory. And finally, in July of 1990, we switched it on, and we made 90 million pounds of tomato paste for the world market and changed the cost structure of an entire industry. And we did it all without a single human boss or manager. And we went on to grow. We built another factory and another factory. We expanded operations up and down the supply chain toward customers and toward the farm itself. And now we're the largest tomato processor in the world, over 700 million in sales, over 2,200 employees in the summertime, over around 400 year-round colleagues. And we've never had a single human boss. All we have is work and people that do work. And I resonated with Jody's comments about autonomy. People have autonomy to do their best work.
Amazing. And I think when I heard you tell the story the first time, you told us what kind of company it was near the end of the story, and it blew me away because we do hear about these autonomous organizations and self-organized organizations in the tech world a lot, but we don't hear about it in the manufacturing world. So I think it's amazing to think that it can happen there. If it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. So thank you, Doug. And I'm going to come back to both of you with some more questions, but I'm going to get Derek and Brian to talk about Agile and Holacracy first. So Derek, I'm going to go to you next. And can you tell us a bit about Agile and how it can work for anyone?
Eeny, meeny, miny, mo, how do you hear my radio? Good? Okay, I see nods. Just wanted to check. Awesome. So Agile has a lot of origin stories, and I will tell my origin story. Um, so as a young lad, I read a lot of science fiction. I like to read nonfiction to learn about what is, and I like to read fiction to learn about what could be. So when I graduated college with a computer science degree, I became a young developer slinging code, and in the environment of project management and predict and control. And I thought something about this is not cool. The idea that we're being engaged in creative endeavors, essentially, making something out of nothing. We're engaged in modern day, postmodern work, thought work, and yet we're pretending that it's the sort of 19th century production work. Either something's wrong with how we're developing, or there's something's wrong with how we're managing it. So my boss at the time then created a consultant and handed me a paper. And the paper was from a conference called Pattern Languages of Object Programming. And at the time, the neat thing about software development is that it's an incredibly fertile, fast breeding ground for ideas. If different industries were the equivalent of petri dishes, the software development world is kind of like maybe your hospital in terms of the adaptive ideas that it creates. And one of these ideas was this thing that was a recipe for how to do something called Agile, and it had a number of rules in terms of roles that people played, and they didn't sound like managers. They sounded more like facilitators and prioritizers. It had rules about getting to the most valuable thing first, and rules for how to engage in certain kinds of meetings. And I thought, well, this is one part hocus pocus, and this is one part wishful thinking. This could never work. But he was the boss, so we tried it, and to my surprise, it was delightful. It was something that allowed groups of people to engage in postmodern work, that is the act of collaborative creation, with some very simple guidelines, and yet without complete chaos. And I thought this is absolutely all right. So fast forward a few years later, I would say that I went from initially converted zealot to Agile and Lean and its associated families are the one true way to do all new product development and new software development and a new service development and change management and everything, to starting to realize that maybe that was a bit much and it was more of a framework for individual learning. And if we follow some of these guidelines, that what happens is, as individuals rub up against the chaos of the world, we learn as a group to adapt to it more rapidly using some of these rules of Agile and Lean. And then finally I moved into, or next to finally, I thought that maybe this is a framework for team learning. And now I describe Agile not so much, everybody asks what is it, and if I were to say what it is, I would be saying the same things that everybody else in this room and on the Hangout is going to say, things like results only, things like values first, things like empowerment. So instead I kind of say not so much what it is, but how it is. And I describe that Agile is like a virus. It has, like a virus, it has an outer shell that attracts organizations to pull it in. They say, oh, this is going to help us be faster and do more with less and give us rules for managing our people. But inside the rules of Agile, inside that shell, that attractive candy coating, is some genetic material that unlocks creative potential and collaboration and gets people hooked on it. And it gets people hooked on improving their own selves, their own teams, their own ability to deliver. And whereas before experiencing it, they might say, yeah, this hippy-trippy, nobody's a manager kind of thing might work somewhere else, but it won't work here. it gets them to actually experience, as someone was saying earlier today, less talk, more action. And when people go through a few iterations or a few trial runs and they experience for themselves firsthand the collaborative power, they start looking for other areas to apply it. So that's been my journey so far.
Thank you very much. And our final panelist is Brian Robertson from Holacracy One. Brian also has a book coming out in June, right, Brian? Yes, June.
That's right.
And I don't have a copy of that one yet, but I will have it very soon. And Brian, like, Holacracy has been all over the news lately with Zappos and everything that's going on there, and the announcement from Tony that, get into Holacracy, or Zappos isn't the company for you. So really interesting stuff happening with Holacracy, and I think not many people really understand what it is. So can you tell us a little bit about Holacracy?
Yes, again. So actually, it ties a lot to what was already shared. So my background actually originally in agile software development, building an agile software development company, and then really looking for how can I bring some of these principles of dynamic responsiveness and self-organization into the whole company and the way everything was structured. I'm an entrepreneur. I was building a software company at the time, and I used that company as a laboratory to experiment with new methods. And very much along the lines of what Doug was saying too, we were looking for how do we bring in some basic system of order without top-down bosses, right? Order without rulers, emergent order that comes from a framework of some basic rules that enable society. And actually, you'll see the same ones in Holacracy, which is the system that came out of this experimentation that Doug described as well. Those two fundamental principles are at the core. What Holacracy does, or is, it's a generic, portable, packaged system, or meta system, if you will, for how power can work in an organization without managers. And it derives, ultimately, it's a constitutional power system for an organization. So instead of having a management hierarchy, you have a constitution that defines how power can be broken down, and it's a distributed process that allows every team to have its own little governance process for distributing who has what authority in that team, who does what, who makes which decisions, what do we expect from each other to go with their authority, and that kind of supplants the management hierarchy. And Holacracy is in use now by a few hundred companies all over the world. So it's really started to spread, actually, just in the past few years quite heavily. And it's kind of, what I realized was it took me years to pioneer that approach. So did Morningstar, so did so many of the other handful of companies that have kind of homegrown their own approach to self-organization and self-management with no management hierarchy, no bosses as we know them. So what we did was really try to package that, try to say, all right, let's come up with a general system, a general tool that's applicable in any kind of business of any shape, size, and can help convert a company from a management hierarchy to something very different that's much more based on self-organization and emergent order and autonomy. So Holacracy is an example of that, and you can find a lot more on holacracy.org or in my upcoming book as well, Holacracy. So that's it in a nutshell.
I'm muted. There we go. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to open the floor up to questions. Now, this is going to be awkward for those of you in the room because you're going to have to come out and see me to ask a question because I'm not in the room. So you're going to have to just come out. I'm just right outside the door that you came in. So you can come out here to ask a question of any of our panelists, and I'm just going to start with a couple. So Doug, I'm going to start with a question for you because I've read your book, I've heard, and there's a few things that I think are interesting about how this whole self-management process functions. One of them is the CLOU, or is that how you pronounce it? Can you tell people about the CLOU?
Yeah, so the CLOU, C-L-O-U, is an acronym for Colleague Letter of Understanding, and what that is essentially is it's an enforceable contract between peers. And at Morningstar, we have, generally speaking, 6, 7, 8, or 9 peers that work together closely in a business unit or an area, and they form an agreement with each other. and they sign these agreements digitally because they're online. And the agreements have several components, and one of them is a personal commercial mission. So we ask people at Morningstar to define their purpose. You know, why are you here? Why do you come to work here every day? And everyone goes through that exercise. And in defining their purpose, they think about, you know, what does excellence look like in my role here? How does what I do contribute to the overall mission of the enterprise? Why am I here? And so that's a key component, and people can take, you know, several months to really hone that in and negotiate it with their fellow colleagues. They also identify their process stewardships, the exact business processes for which they will be accountable and responsible. And for each business process, identifying performance measures, because in a self-managed ecosystem, there are no managers to come around and tell you if you're doing a good job or a bad job. People have to measure themselves, and we call those stepping stones because we consider them stepping stones toward perfection. We only benchmark perfection. We don't benchmark against other companies or other industries. So a cost benchmark would be 0. An efficiency benchmark would be 100%. And then they negotiate decision rights. You know, am I responsible for making this decision, or merely making recommendations, or am I acting on a decision that someone else has made? And so that's the content of the colleague letter of understanding. It achieves clarity of understanding, purpose, and vision, and people understand what they do themselves and what their peers are doing as well, and hold each other accountable.
Right. So this is not a manager saying these are your responsibilities. This is them deciding with their peers who makes those decisions and what your roles are in those.
Precisely. Exactly
Awesome.
Right.
So very, very unique and different. Jody, one of the things that stands out to me about Row is the elimination of sludge. Can you talk briefly about sludge, because I think everyone can relate to sludge being spread in their organization, and like what happens when that's gone?
Yes, I can talk about sludge, and I think everybody can relate to sludge because it's in every workplace, and it's the one thing that actually helps a culture overcome inertia from where it is today. So sludge is that language where people are judging how other people are spending their time, and it sounds like this. Boy, I wish I had a kid and I could leave early every day. Or, boy, it must be nice to be able to come in late every day like that. Or, boy, those smokers get a lot of breaks, don't they? So it's people talking about how other people are spending their time in the workplace. And one of the things that we do when we help organizations move to a results-only work environment is we have an environmental sludge eradication strategy that removes all of this irrelevant language from the workplace. You can't be autonomous if people are talking about how other people are spending their time. So we flip this language to language that's relevant and about the work every day in the workplace. I wanted to talk about something, though, that's really unique and different about a results-only work environment that, you know, I'm listening to everybody talk about the holacracy method and whatnot. It's very interesting, the structures we're putting together in the future of work, because that whole idea of management, which is really the manipulation of human capital, we're moving into a future where that is not going to fly, right? That whole manipulation of people. And what we've done with the results-only work environment is we've created the results coach. So people, when they're autonomous and accountable, they're really self-governing, right? And they have to understand what the work is, and they have to work together as teams. So sludge can't exist, right? That kind of snarky language. But people oftentimes get in positions where they're having issues and trouble getting to those results, and they need help. So the results coach is somebody that can come in and knock down barriers. They're a sounding board. So it's not the same hierarchy that existed in the old-fashioned world where I have to give you permission or you have to come and ask me if you can work from home. It's not that old-style boss who's that, you know, command and control boss. It's a coaching role that's much different. It's more on the same level as everybody else. So that's the difference. I love what we're talking about today because it's really it's the same type of thing. It's breaking down those hierarchies, but a results-only work environment still keeps that role, but switches it from that manager, old style manager, to a results coach, somebody I can still go to help us as a team move forward in the work that we're trying to do. Love this conversation. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you. So interesting. So in Row, there's still managers. They're just not managing the people. They're managing the work, and they're coaching the people for the results.
Yes, and we don't call them managers because that has such a connotation, right? When people hear manager, it's like they seize up because, oh, that's somebody I have to ask permission to. That's sort of a, it's an authoritarian figure, and that's what we're trying to break down because that doesn't give me autonomy if I have that authoritarian figure. I don't feel autonomous like Doug was talking about.
It's kind of it's kind of like the word to my supervisor, which makes it sound like that person is superior to me. It's like that, that whole feeling.
And I think Doug was talking about that, how his teams, felt, they could move things along better when they had that autonomy. And then this coach doesn't have power over them in the way that they used to, so that disappears. But this coach person is there to still help them, knock down barriers and help them see things clear if they can't get through a business problem. So that's where that manager role switches.
That's great. That
Not
makes
easy,
sense.
though.
Thank you. No. Well, all of these changes are difficult, right?
Yep.
Derek, can you tell us a little bit about, you mentioned rules with Agile. Are there simple rules that maybe one that any organization, whether you work in manufacturing or retail or whatever you work in, a simple rule that might apply to all that helps an organization become a little more agile, or one of the systems that can be put in place?
So what's the silver bullet? The silver bullet is that there is no silver bullet. But no, so I mentioned before I'd given the analogy of a virus, and it's really kind of a family of viri. So there are actually several different, and Brian used the word frameworks, and in the Agile Lean community we really like the word frameworks because they are an interlocking set of guidelines. So one particular very easy to get started with framework is called Scrum, and it comes from the name comes from the rugby world, which is when everybody sort of locks arms and gets together to push that ball down the field. And we like to say that there are something along the lines of 3 roles, 3 artifacts, and 3 ceremonies. But one of the ceremonies that I think if I were to pull out of those 9 things that we could talk about, the one that I think I would pull out is this notion of a work cycle or an inspection interval. And I'm going to go right back to what was said earlier today about action being something that motivates people and action being something that leads people. The way this works is that a team, and we could do this with a software development team, a new product development team, a HR team is trying to come up with a new system, and I actually use it with management teams when they're engaged in change management, is we pick a cadence. So some kind of a regular rhythm, whether it's 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 3 weeks, something that we're all really used to. And during a cycle of that cadence, we do a little bit of planning together, but not much. And we do a lot of working collaboratively, kind of like how we all work together collaboratively to resolve the audio issue earlier today. We were focused purely on an outcome, which is stop the feedback, and not so much on you do these tests, you do these tests, you do these tests. During this work cycle, we have high visibility and communication to each other, and then here's the kicker. At the end of this work cycle, we inspect 2 things. We inspect whatever the outcome is. So was it a change in policy? Let's inspect it. Let's have some measurements on it. Let's see what the effect was. Was it something we created? Let's check its fitness for purpose. But we need to see the thing that came out. And the second thing that we inspect at the end of this work cycle is the experience. I won't say the process, but the experience of the work cycle. How did it feel? What did we like about it? What did we not like about the way it worked? And what small changes might we make in the next cycle as we work? So this acts kind of like a snowball rolling down a hill. With each roll through the cadence, both the outcome and the way that we work gathers more momentum, selecting for the things that are good and shedding the things that are bad.
It kind of it makes me think of how in a lot of organizations I've worked in, we do a post-mortem after a project, but it's kind of too late, right? Like, so having these inspection intervals is like, it makes you more agile because, like you said, you're keeping the things that are working, you're making them even better, and you're stopping things that aren't, and you're continuously doing that instead of at the end of a project.
The thing I say about postmortems is that they find out why we died.
Right, yes, that's
I'd rather
not effective.
find out how to grow.
All right, thank you very much. Now, I have one. And if you are in the room and you'd like to ask any of these 4 experts a question, come out of the room and come and see me, and you will be next in line for a question. So you can start to line up now. We have about 15 more minutes with them. So I'm going to ask Brian, though, quickly about holacracy and like, what do you think is what's the hardest part of implementing this? Like, we've seen the news from Zappos about 214 people leaving. I actually think that, you know, that's probably a good thing. But like, what's the hardest part? What do you think there is the biggest struggle for people when they're implementing this kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I think the really interesting number actually in the Zappos story is that 86% of their staff turned down a lot of money to stay and be part of the shift to a totally self-managed system.
So true.
I think that's pretty cool. And the ones that did opt out, probably they would have lost them anyway over the next couple of years because of the part of this that is hard. And this is not an easy transformation at all. And the metaphor I use, it's kind of like growing up and moving out of your parents' house. And suddenly you have to be an adult. And you know, you get to go from looking to the parental leader to take care of us, to remove obstacles for us, to solve issues for us, to tell us what to do, to take a decision that we're not comfortable leading and make it for us, or bless the decision we think we should make so we can kind of hide in that nice system. And this removes all of those hiding spaces, puts people in more of an adult-to-adult, peer-to-peer relationship, and says, you get to solve your own issues. And here are all the tools to do that. Here's the way you can change anything in the company, any expectation on anyone in the system. Here's the way you can change the authority structure. Here's how you can get the property rights to make whatever decisions you need to make or influence someone else that holds them. You have channels for all of that. But the hard part is that means you have to lead your role as an adult without having a manager to hide under, look to, rely upon. So it changes the parent-child dynamic that even in the healthiest management hierarchies, you still have this parent-child dynamic. It's just a supportive, helpful parent, but it's still a parent-child dynamic. And that's the biggest shift or leap I see is when you take this stance and this change and you give people the autonomy and the pathways to change anything they want in the company, you know, and they can lead all of that themselves, suddenly they have to be an adult in adult-to-adult relationships. And I don't mean to understate that. That's a big shift for people that are very comfortable using a different system. And the other piece of that is when you have professional managers, especially from the middle management ranks somewhere, that have kind of gotten used to getting their self-esteem met through being that heroic parent-like manager themselves. And they have to get out of that role, and they have to, you know, suddenly let their kids go off to college and be their own adults. And they have to find a new way of getting their own self-esteem met, a new way of feeling like, here's how I add value in the system. And that's really hard. You know, that's a really big shift.
And if I'm a manager and there's a problem with something, well, okay, are there managers in Holacracy?
Not in any way. There's no management hierarchy. There's functions, like somebody has to choose who to hire. So there's functions, but they're distributed in a totally different way. No managers, as you wouldn't recognize a system running with Holacracy as having any managers in it.
That's great. I have a question from the audience, so I'm going to invite you, if you can tell them who you are, and then you can ask a question.
Hey guys, I'm everyone in the room there. I'm Word. I'm from Rural Molding. Sorry, my
little bit taller than Pam is. Let me try and get in the center here. I'm just wondering, what kind of qualities and characteristics, is there like a common denominator of types of people that thrive in these types of environments? Like what kind of people work better in these environments compared to the traditional work environments, and how do you identify those people?
Yeah. Well, I can just continue on from my last thought, just to start briefly. At least with Holacracy, there is no type requirement. It's not only for a certain style. I've seen people of radically different styles, types, and all that. The thing that matters is more about maturity and openness. So it's more, are they open to learning a new way? It doesn't matter what style they are. At least in Holacracy, all styles are embraced and will find a place in the system if they can let go of what they know and learn something new and go back to being a beginner in the meantime. And that can be that limits people for sure, but it's more about maturity and openness than style.
I agree with Brian. I would say that there's not a type of person that can work in these type of environments. I think people that opt out of this type of environment like to hide underneath a system where they can say just put in their time every day, come in, punch the real time clock or pretend time clock, and not do anything. I mean, it's as simple as that. There's a way to hide in systems, and in these type of environments, you actually have to produce results. And so I don't think there's a type, really. I think in anybody, if you are an adult and you understand what you're supposed to be delivering and you're clear about that, that's what this is all about.
Can I jump in on that?
Mm.
I want to amplify what was just said about it's not the type and about the person. And I think as soon as we start asking what type of person, we're trying to do new things in old ways. We need to ask what type of work and assume that all people are capable of working in these ways. And then, as was said earlier, maybe let attrition run the course. It's sort of the four-fold test I use for any of these kind of things is let's look at the work. Is it creative? Is it collaborative? Is it critical? In other words, is it important that we succeed? If it's not, then whatever. And is it something that we can learn with? Is it changeable? So I use kind of 4C: creative, collaborative, critical, and changeable. And if the work is those four things, then let's try and bring the people into the 21st century rather than trying to get to best fit, which is, I think, a 20th century term.
Yeah, I have one major thought on that, and that is that in a self-managed ecosystem, it's absolutely crucial that people are willing to give up power and relinquish command authority. And some of the situations where people have not been able to do that have resulted in the individuals, having to exit the enterprise, because when you can't tell people what to do, people don't have to listen to you. So leadership is not conferred by position; it's conferred by acquiring trust, respect, and communication, and building those relationships over time. Professor Ian Robertson wrote a book called The Winner Effect: How Power Affects the Brain, and he talks about how when people issue commands, they can receive a shot of dopamine, and such the power becomes literally addictive. And it's absolutely crucial that people are willing to relinquish command authority to be successful in a truly self-managed ecosystem.
Tangibly, how to get started?
Like, let's say you're doing a product launch, and it requires multiple team members.
Come on, you can. Gord has another question.
Okay, so this sounds really cool, but also a little bit abstract. Map it out for me in a kind of a tangible example. Let's just say you're launching a product, or you're doing a promotion, something that requires people from multiple teams and across different disciplines. How do you nominate people from the different groups, the finance groups, the marketing groups, the operation groups, to come in and work collaboratively with each other? And how does that automatically not default into some sort of hierarchy at that point?
Did you all hear that question?
Yep.
I know we had a group of students walking by us over here. Okay, so who do you want to ask? Is that to Brian, Doug?
We'll guess Doug, 'cause he's got like the actual manufacturing. Like,
Doug. So Roma Molding is a manufacturing organization. So, you know, knowing that you're in the tomato kind of manufacturing processing, can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there is no role of nominator in a self-managed ecosystem. People nominate themselves. They organize themselves around projects and processes and initiatives. And what was the second part of the question?
so if people are nominating themselves, or however that decision is arrived, do you not therefore get some sort of de facto leader within the group, and somebody
Right.
who, the hierarchy starts to form naturally?
Yeah, so in self-management, if people form hierarchies voluntarily, that's perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Dr. Seguro Mitra today spoke at a conference and talked about spontaneous order. And so we see spontaneous order forming at the intersection of chaos and order, and that's what happens in self-management. People organize themselves. If they want to nominate a leader, fine. If leadership evolves naturally and rotates among every single member of the team, that's fine too, as long as the agreement is voluntary and it's not issued by command and control.
That's great. Thank you, Gord, and thank you to all of you. Before I let you go, so we've got just 4 minutes left, so if I can get each of you to share in your last minute one action that people in the room could take maybe to get started in thinking about or acclimatizing their organization towards a role, holacracy, agile self-management, and where can they find out more about this? So I know some of you have books, websites, certification workshops, all that kind of stuff. Can you just share that in 1 minute? Jody, go first.
Okay, so Pam, you know we have a certification coming up, the role certification workshop that's coming up in
9th and 10th, I think?
Yes, June 9th and 10th, and people can go on the website gorow.com, and we actually have a special a code that people can put in when they go to the registration page. If they put in ROWE, ROWE, they will get a 20% discount on the ticket. So that's for your participants today. If they put that in, they'll get 20% off their ticket. ROWE, RWS.
Awesome, thank you. And one thing that they could maybe do to get started, Jody?
Well, one thing they can do to get started is they can start thinking about autonomy instead of flexibility. They can start thinking about how they can start giving people autonomy and get clear, unmeasurable results for each and every person in their organization.
Awesome.
And check our website out for that certification workshop. Get certified, then you'll know how to implement this in your organization correctly. There actually is a process.
Switching to this. Doug, 1 minute about something they could start and think to acclimatize their organization now, and where can they find out more about you?
Thank you. I would encourage people to create a personal commercial mission statement for themselves. Describe your purpose and why you come to work, what excellence looks like in your role, and how what you do aligns with the enterprise mission that you're working for and toward. How to find out more information, 2 websites. Redshift3.org has some information about self-management and my book. The selfmanagementinstitute.org website has a plethora of content, videos, blogs, newsletters, white papers, etc. And I'm willing to link in with anybody at your conference on LinkedIn that wants to learn more. I have content there as well.
Awesome, thank you. And you are all of you are on Twitter. We did share your Twitter handles earlier in the day, so we'll make sure people have those as well. Derek, one thing and where to find out more or connect with you.
Okay, sorry, it wasn't unmuting. One thing. I would say that if you're going to start one thing, do what's called a retrospective, and so those are two things together. You can find out more about me at About Me, Derek W. Wade. In there, you can find links to my SlideShare. You'll find various slides and guidelines and all about me. I like to call myself a promiscuous collaborator, so I really like to make things with people. So if someone wants to make a very small thing together and run through a work cycle together, reach out, let's see what we can do. When people make things together, they bond and find ways to work. So let's talk about that. One of the things that you'll find through the SlideShare is a practice called retrospectives, which is a fancy word that means let's do those two kinds of inspections that I mentioned earlier. And if you were going to engage in one practice, engage in that. Start a work interval, ask those 3 questions at the end of the work interval, be really open about what comes out, and if you want to evolve more rapidly, make those things turn more rapidly. Don't overthink it.
Great, thank you. And Brian, last but not least, one thing to kind of get started thinking about Holacracy for their organization, and where can they find out more about Holacracy and link up with you?
Yeah, so Holacracy, it's great to just get a taste of it, an overall glimpse of what this thing is. And a good way to do that, we have free online webinars we do where we kind of just give the whirlwind tour of how does this whole system work, what's it look like. We show you some real records from a real company and kind of walk through an example. So you can see those on our website. We schedule them every couple of months, so just go on to holacracy.org. And you'll find the examples on there. There's also a white paper on there for free that has some little case studies of just a couple of companies and what they're doing, as well as an overall description of what this method is. So those are kind of good ways just to kind of dig in and get a big picture view. Of course, my book too gives that. And there's a whole chapter in the book on, even if you can't adopt all of Holacracy, here's a few things you can actually take out of it. There's a whole chapter on that, so check that out. For example, there's a whole simple meeting method in there that if you do nothing else but use that meeting method, you'll probably see your meetings go from exceedingly painful, like most meetings tend to be, to the kind of meetings where people leave feeling like, wow, that was awesome, I can't wait till our next meeting, which is not that common.
Wow, I can imagine that. That's great. All right. I want to say thank you to all 4 of you for sharing your thoughts and your expertise with us today. And I'll ask the audience to just give you a round of applause. Thank you all. I've got you all on the screen so they can all see you.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to stop the broadcast.